new functionalities and the need for new partnerships.
Yes, exactly. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much. And I think that, I hope that my contribution will somehow complete Thierry's one and anticipate the others. I am working in DG Transport and Mobility of the European Commission, and from there I follow the development of the framework program for research and innovation, and also the developments that the impact on policy of the research and vice versa. So to start with, in fact, last year we launched some working groups on the strategic transport research and innovation agenda, and asked several groups, 7 groups in particular, to draft roadmaps or better strategies for actions for innovation in different fields from now to 2050. So the roadmaps, of course, can only adapt to the first years of this planning, but I mean the strategic view would be much longer term. For the infrastructure, I think that the major challenges and the major issues to be analyzed were the following. So there is the need to adapt the infrastructure to different vehicles. So as you know, technological advances and developments on the vehicle side has been enormous in the last few decades, but the infrastructure is still the same, indeed. So maybe we need to adapt it to new needs for vehicles, and in particular for all the requirements that automation will give to the infrastructure. So we do not talk any longer only of physical infrastructure, but also of digital infrastructure and the interaction between the two. Reduce the footprint of the construction and maintenance. We will see later on. I don't think that maybe I didn't include that here in this presentation because it was not very pertinent. In fact, the real environmental footprint of infrastructure is not due to their construction or operation activities, which really impact very little, on the transport general impact, environmental impact, but a well-performing infrastructure can drastically reduce the impact, the environmental impact of vehicles that are using it. So it is absolutely important to have a well-functioning infrastructure, also to have the highest possible efficiency from the environmental point of view, from the vehicle's point of view. The hottest point that came out of our expert indeed was that real development and innovation for infrastructure is not really based on technologies or development of new technologies. Technologies are there. Technologies must be used. But in order to apply this new technology, we need a different business model and a different approach of the authorities to the, let's put it in the real word, that is used to the procurement of innovation. So there is a need of changing the governance of the general the management. Our working group was on multimodal infrastructure, and that is more or less our continuous approach. We do consider that the transport system as a whole, with all the modes of transport included and interconnected. Of course, we recognize and acknowledge the specificities of each mode and the relevant infrastructure. So here we try to focus on road, but it is important to consider that road is not alone. Road has to have a dialogue and has to cooperate for a better general performance of the transport system with rail, with inland waterways, and with other modes. Of course, what is absolutely needed, especially in a time of crisis and lack of resources, is to increase the durability of the infrastructure, including and not curbing the safety performance, to avoid congestion, and to support interconnectivity and modal shift, as we said. So again, we said that innovative governance and funding schemes are absolutely important to be applied to speed up deployment of innovation. And all this can only be supported if we can create a more risky-friendly attitude of the operators. So let me try then to summarize a little bit which have been the outcome of this working group. The identification of the major challenges is really that there is an enormous expectation and an enormous demand from the users of a continuously working infrastructure with a certain level of intolerance of disruptions. But is that first of all, is that correct? How far should we reply to this demand? But of course, I think that to have a fully operational infrastructure, even in cases of major disruption, is a wish for everybody, and especially the reliability of the infrastructure is more important even than the availability. But of course, as Thierry said, the forever open road is that we try to have as short and as non-intrusive closure of the infrastructure for maintenance uses as much as possible. The advances on the technologies on vehicles, of course, is also putting on transport infrastructure a demand for data and data connectivity. That is really the big change, the big change driver for that, because also operational services will be completely different. And so the infrastructure needs for that to be more flexible and adaptable to a quite quickly changing demand from the users. ITS systems, of course, can be extremely useful to increase the efficiency of the operations, but they're costly. And in particular, if we consider the life cycle of ICT technologies and standard infrastructure technologies, that could not be a problem as such, but the uncertainty of what are the necessary digital services for the infrastructure and who and how has to be invested in that is keeping authorities from the first investment. So it's delaying the time to start working on that. Of course, the growing digital connectivity is also a big issue, a big facilitator for the road operators, because it gives the individual users, be they freight or person transporters, to decide their path, to have alternatives, and especially in cases of disruption or congestions. But this also gives a different way of having a completely disaggregated and disseminated decision making, even higher than today. So there is a loss of control from the operators unless we change the model of managing the transport flow and the traffic flow. I would like to go a little bit further on, because that gives, again, the issue of the multimodality. This traffic flow should be controlled and eased. I don't want to say monitored or steered, but at least eased along all the different transport modes. But the conditions that we have today of operating do not allow really operators to work together. They need a different push. I have been working on trying to create a multimodal infrastructure community, at least for the last 6 years. I succeeded only partly, And I hope that the little seeds I put in the community, at least for the researchers, will continue, because I see every day that one or the other say, oh, but you know, I'm convinced that I can cooperate with the others. So we are no longer in competitions. We should do something together. So maybe this will give some fruits later on. So the problem then is that you have different networks working together. As we said, the digital infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, the energy infrastructure. That is the other part that I would like to add to the picture. And that is, of course, to the governments to decide how to find a way to work on them and to connect them together in a new governance scheme. There is a need to incentivize operators to not only to develop sustainable innovations, but also to put them in practice, and that can only be done to incentivizing the risk attitude of the public operators, because otherwise they are not, as I always said, usually, I mean, the procurers of this sort of activities are civil servants. Civil servants are not paid to take risk. So you have to give them some incentives and some rules and some guarantees in order for them to be able to go into a more risky decisions. Otherwise, they are not done for that. So that is not to put the blame on them, to find the justification and possibly to find a solution to overcome that. So all these things also, I don't want to repeat very much what already has been said in details by Thierry, but all these changes will need to have an infrastructure that is extremely adaptable. So construction systems, maintenance systems, adaptation of the other networks that are serving and providing services to the infrastructure should be designed and put in practice in a different way from that we are used. I mean, if you think the technology of our roads is exactly the same as the Romans had. The only thing we changed a little bit some of the materials, no more than that. But I mean, the technology is still the same. It's exactly the same as 2,000 years ago. So let's see if we can find something different. We are now in a time in which the mobility is different, and we can try to follow that. Again, this request of availability and reliability demand a certain redundancy of the infrastructure, but we have to be quite careful not to exaggerate, so to find exactly the right balance between using the existing infrastructure and creating a new, let's say, a redundant one or a supportive one, but without exceeding. We cannot afford to have too much infrastructure that then it's not used. So, and what is very difficult today is really the anticipation of what traffic demand will be tomorrow. Because with new mobility models like sharing mobility or mobility on demand, Pia will talk about that, I presume, or cycling instead of driving, could change drastically. So places that are now under congestion maybe will no longer be congested in a few years if we change the way in which we use it. So we have to be careful in planning exceeding infrastructure for the future. So, but what is the solution for that? We do not have solutions. We didn't have that in Stria. I surely don't have here today. I just put you some questions and some possible lines for joint work in the future. It is absolutely important to increase the collaboration between public and private sectors, and not only on the operational side, but also on the strategic way, and we also including other operators and other providers that are not the usual ones. we need to find some different ways to incentivize and support innovation, sharing risk, and to collaborate in particular. So for that, we need a legal framework that cannot be too prescriptive because things can change so quickly and so drastically, but that can give, let's say, some guidelines and some requirements so that every kind of business model that will be adopted, even if it will be led to the market to decide the details, but is responding to some equity and fairness principles for which we cannot abide in Europe. So then the governance structure are changing, of course, but I went a bit, no, sorry. Yes. Yeah, so this framework should include regulation on the provision of the other services. I mentioned here energy and ICT services because they are the need of, not of tomorrow, of today. We need them now already in order to have a viable and reliable infrastructure. We need to ensure standardization, and we need to find a new way of taxation because you will not only be taxed for the use of the infrastructure, physical infrastructure, but you will have to be charged for example, for the recharging posts of electricity. You have to be taxed for the use of communication systems. And that is a very complex system that is not so easy. I mean, that cannot be just the vignette, or maybe can be the vignette, but then it's a different vignette that should be invented in order to respond and to satisfy all these needs. Important is to support a more risky attitude of the public administration, and that can be done in collaboration with the private sector, and to find ways to share this risk according to who is the best suited for which risk. As I said, the public agencies are not risk prone, so we should really find a way to give best practices, to give references, and to ensure that legally it is possible to take over these risks. So, again, that is up to possibly to the member state to develop innovative business measures and to give also appetite of the public sector to cooperate with them. But also the public sector should play its role and possibly increase this investment in capitals and increase the focus on developing a transport infrastructure with a higher level of performance and reliability. So we need a private investment as well in that. What is my final work? My final word is collaboration. Let's try to favorize a higher mindset towards collaboration across different sectors. I mean, productive and service sectors that are not the traditional one. Collaboration between public and private, collaboration between different transport modes. And I think that is the first step in order to find solutions that can satisfy all the possible stakeholders that will take part in this process. And this subject in particular will be discussed a little bit more in detail in a session that we will have at TRA, organized by Christophe Nicodem as well. And I invite you all to join us, if you can, in Vienna from the 16th to the 19th of April for the TRA. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. And First of all, thank you for giving us the opportunity to have this session during the TRA. Is there any question to be addressed? Yes? Over there.
Thank you. Working? Can you hear me? Thank you, Cristina Marolda. It's always a pleasure to hear your presentation. You made a reference, I'm not sure if, is this working properly?
Yes.
Oh, okay. You made a reference in your presentation to asking more collaboration between the public and the private sector. Sorry, maybe I should introduce myself. Susanna Zamataro from the International Road Federation in Geneva, Switzerland. And this is a call that we have been hearing a lot over the past day and today as well in many of the sessions, and probably that's one of the reasons why we are here today. I think if I saw that right in your slide, you were saying that public-private collaborations is very often limited to operational issues. I'm not sure I understood completely what you meant by that. My question is, how do you see, you as a professional having so much experience, and how does the Commission see this increased collaboration between the public and private sector happening? We, for example, represent the view of the sector within the ITS advisory board of the European Commission, and we try to bring to the table that, is this the kind of settings that you have in mind? I was not sure I understood how you see that happening. I think many of the companies sitting here would love actually to sit at a table and discuss with the Commission, ways on which we can collaborate. And it's, as you said in your concluding slide, extremely needed. There's no way we can move forward with the challenges we have to face without working together. Thank you.
Yes, Susanna, I think that I took literally some sentences from the report of the STRIA roadmap, so there is not my wording, what is in the slides. That's why they are too long. Usually I do not use so long text in my slides, but this time I wanted to report carefully what was said. The operational level collaboration is on procurement. So regulations, standards, and procurement side. That is more or less the collaboration that is usually done, and with industry that can, or private sector that can influence a little bit the development of that. I think that today it is absolutely needed to extend this collaboration on a wider range of subjects. I mean, from the strategic approach to the financial aspects, to the risk-sharing aspects, so there is a wider number of fields that need a higher collaboration and work hand in hand from the public and the private sector. I don't know if I replied correctly to your question, and I think that the Commission, as you said, is trying to set up platforms on this respect. It takes time. It is not an obvious work, because it also requires a mindset change from all the parties. So that is my plea today here to all of you.
Other question? Yeah.
Oui, Georges Tempès, ma question sera en français si vous le voulez bien. Je voulais juste comprendre de quel risque vous parliez quand vous parliez de partage des risques. On est sur quelle nature de risque? Je dirais, en tant que puissance publique, sur les routes, je dirais, il y a des risques de sécurité, des risques de sûreté. Et qu'est-ce qu'on veut dire quand on dit partage de risques et quand on parle en même temps de routes tout le temps ouvertes? Où est la part du risque?
Le risque fondamental, c'est un risque financier. Hein? C'est l'investissement et le temps de retour. Donc, c'est pas correct que seulement l'autorité publique puisse prendre sur soi tous les risques d'un retour plus délayé. Donc, c'est la partie privée qui aussi doit s'engager à investir avec un peu plus de long-term return. Et des risques aussi de fiabilité. Bon, maintenant, je crois que pendant le déjeuner, justement, je parlais avec des collègues. S'il y a un système de sécurité lié à l'infrastructure digitale qui est en panne, qui est le responsable?
Oui,
Qui est
oui.
le responsable? C'est le gesteur de l'infrastructure, de la route, c'est le gesteur de l'information, c'est les véhicules qui n'a pas de redondance pour répondre à ça. Qui ça? Donc, c'est tout un système qu'il faut créer à nouveau pour répondre à ces questions ici.
Oui, je pense que là, on doit envisager toute une série de risques différents, qui soient légaux, pratiques, financiers, au niveau de la sécurité, etc. Et je crois qu'il y a énormément de niveaux dont il faut tenir compte, c'est certain. Thank you very much, Maria Cristina. But we'll have the opportunity at the end of the presentations. All the speakers will gather here, and we will have some open discussion. Now, I call our next speaker, Antonio Avenoso from the European Transport Safety Council. Antonio is going to talk about Road Safety Horizon